Tonight, we've come to the market town of Northwich in Cheshire. This area has a mix of political sentiment. We're in a Labour constituency, but it's Conservative on either side. Our audience members have been arriving in the last few hours and have been preparing their questions and opinions for our political guests. And as a group, as every week, they are selected to reflect the overall electoral picture across the country. And tonight, with this panel and this audience, I'm sure we will hear some strongly held views on, amongst other things, Ukraine and Donald Trump. And when it comes to Chancellor, is it ever OK to say things on your CV that aren't true? Welcome to Question Time. Tonight, we have from the government, Jacqui Smith. She's a member of the House of Lords and is Minister for Skills in the Education Department. She was Britain's first female Home Secretary, serving in Gordon Brown's cabinet in that position from 2007 to 2009. Danny Kruger is a Conservative Shadow Work and Pensions Minister. Before becoming an MP, he was a speechwriter for David Cameron, founded and ran a crime prevention charity, and worked as an advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. Making her first Question Time appearance is Lisa Smart, who speaks for the Liberal Democrats on Home Affairs. She was first elected in July and before that was Deputy Leader of Stockport Council. Matthew Goodwin is an academic and author. He's written several recent books about populism and argues there's a growing gap between the so-called elites and everyone else. He was a professor at the University of Kent until last summer and now analyses politics in both his weekly newsletter and on YouTube. And George Monbiot is a Guardian columnist, a former investigative journalist and an author of some 20 books on politics and climate change. In some of his latest work, he accuses the Labour government of committing environmental vandalism and learning straight from the Trump playbook. Welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience here in Northwich, and of course, welcome to you at home. You can join in the conversation on social media, you can just watch the programme and hear what sort of questions we have from our audience and what our panel has to say. To that end, let's get our first question, which is from Catherine Tipping.
Is it ever OK to put something that's honest, to put things on a CV that are not true?
Is it ever OK to put things on a CV that are not true? So, Catherine, I'm assuming you're referring to the Chancellor.
I am indeed.
Rachel Reeves. So, just for those of you not followed, this is a story today that the BBC has been reporting. So, Rachel Reeves has changed her CV today. It's the second time she's had to correct it. So, just to fill you in, she said many times, for example, that she worked for the Bank of England for the best part of a decade. Her CV showed it was less than that, and today it's been cut further, changed again to show it was only 5.5 years. She also changed how long she worked at a previous bank, Halifax Bank of Scotland. And previously, her CV said that she was, and she often said herself, that she was an economist at the Bank of Scotland. Last year, she changed that to a role of retail banking. So a few changes there. Jacqui.
Well, let's be clear. What we're talking about is not a CV. What we're talking about is a LinkedIn account produced by her staff, which she didn't see before it went up. Now, I'm sure she
Yeah, but it said what job she'd done, and to everyone else, that sounds a bit like a CV,
Well, no,
it?
a CV is what you submit to somebody when you're trying to get a job, and it would be wholly wrong if what you said on that was not true. But this was a LinkedIn account, and when brought to her attention, she's corrected it.
She's also said that she worked at the Bank of England for the best part of a decade. She said that many times.
She said it. She said it in a speech, and I think one other article.
Yes, but in fact, it was 5.5 years. That's quite a lot less than that.
The point here, Fiona, is actually she is probably the best qualified Chancellor that we've had for a considerable period of time. She is a trained economist, which is, you know, given some of the sort of chaos we've had from Chancellors and Prime Ministers in budgets in the recent past, is actually something really, really important. And in the end, I think the proof of Rachel Reeves' value and significance will be whether or not she can, as we are attempting to do now, move ourselves out of the stagnation of the last government, fix the foundations of the economy, ensure that we're actually able to grow the economy in the way that she's been absolutely relentless in focusing on. And I think that will be, rather than the sort of playing the woman rather than the ball stuff that we've seen today. That's what's really important about your Chancellor.
Danny?
Well, the fact is she was applying for a job. She was applying for the job of Chancellor of the United Kingdom before the election, and she made quite a lot of those qualifications that you just described, Jacqui.
Well,
I think the significant...
She is a trained economist.
Well, she said things about herself that turned out not to be the case. But I'd agree with you that the real test is in her actual performance, and I don't think much of her qualifications as an economist if she's doing what she's done for the economy. So we've just had growth figures out today showing that growth is non-existent in this country. We've had 2 consecutive quarters of flatlining growth. We've got inflation rising, we've got unemployment rising. We've got serious forecasts from the Bank of England suggesting that the economy is on the wrong trajectory, and it's precisely because of Rachel Reeves's budget. And I'm not going to defend... I'm not going to... Before you go onto the inheritance, by the way, the economy was improving significantly at the last election, but I recognise our economy needs significant work. But Rachel came in promising to get things right, and so far we've seen people losing their jobs across the country. She's taking away benefits from pensioners. She's harming the rural economy directly. She's putting national insurance contributions on employers everywhere. She's doing an anti-growth job. So I don't think much of her qualifications, if that's what she's got.
Okay, let me come back to you, Jacqui. I know you want to come back. I will a little bit later on. Yes, woman there in the black and white top.
I think what we want from our politicians, certainly what I want from our politicians, is a policy and the behaviour of radical transparency. It's absolutely not OK when things are not transparent, because it undermines the other messages that are really important. And as for the budget and the economy, we've got a government now that's promising to halve violence against women and girls in 10 years and yet has dedicated no further money towards making that happen. That doesn't sound to me like somebody's really thought of the economics of that promise.
All right. First at the back in the red top.
Yeah, Jacqui mentioned about it was on LinkedIn. As she just completely undermined LinkedIn, saying there's no truth in it. And what you were saying there, it was a member of her staff that put it on. It bore no relation to the history of her work. So why should we believe what's on LinkedIn anymore?
OK, woman here in the front in the glasses.
Hi. So going back to the original question about CVs and lying on a CV, now the problem is somebody like myself, I have a Masters in Law, I have an LPC, but there's no jobs there for it. So when I go for a normal job, it's, oh, you're too overqualified, or, oh, you've never done this before. Why, if you've got all these qualifications, why do you want a job here at McDonald's, for instance? And it's just like, because we need to provide for our families and everything. So the only way to do it is by lying on the CV and going back on what you haven't done, even though you've got all these qualities and all these different things that you've done, and you want to show and express who you are, but you can't get anywhere with it because of how it is and the fears of education with everything to it.
OK. Just to be clear, I think anyone suggesting that Rachel Reeves deliberately lied, that's not the allegation, but the fact is there were things on her CV, whether you want to call it CV or not, that were they're not correct. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's not OK, to go back to Catherine's question, to mislead people on your LinkedIn, to lie to people, whichever it is. I mean, this was a government, a Labour government that, remember, came in on the big play that they were going to restore trust in British politics, they were going to return integrity to public life. And, you know, if this had happened under any other party, we wouldn't hear the end of it, right? So we all know that. But the bigger problem, I think, with Rachel Reeves and the Labour government is the economic model that they are imposing on the country. They're afraid, like Conservatives are as well, both of the big parties, to challenge what we have, which is managed decline. An economy that is big tax, big debt, big spending, big net zero, big immigration, an economic model that is delivering low growth, high debt, declining GDP per capita, productivity is going the wrong way. And the problem is you're all paying the costs of that because the bills are going through the roof, you know, 25 to 50 billion on net zero by the end of the decade, 234 billion, according to a report this week, on mass migration, which is taking more out of the economy than it's putting in, by the way. I know that's controversial to say, but it's true. But the reality is Westminster now has this orthodoxy, so nobody will question that economic model. Rachel Reeves won't do it, Keir Starmer won't do it, Kemi Badenoch really won't do it either. And we're terrified now of actually challenging this consensus in Westminster. And so all we've got, you, me, taxpayers, is this never-ending managed decline. And I don't think Rachel Reeves is going to solve it. I don't think the Labour government's going to solve it. I don't think the Conservatives are going to solve it. We need radical change from the status quo.
Man in the striped shirt.
For me, fundamentally, it comes down to trust. Even if the information put out by Rachel wasn't put out by her, it's incorrect, and how can we trust the information that's put out?
OK. The man here in the blue sweater.
I think this is nitpicking, really. It's not a CV. She's had less than 6 months in post. Give her a chance. Let's judge her on the performance.
OK. Lisa.
Yeah, I think the point there is right about judging somebody on their performance. Of course, it's daft to embellish a CV, which was Catherine's question. But the Chancellor had a very big job to pick up from the steaming disaster that was left by the last Conservative government. That said, it has been disappointing to see the most recent budget and the impact it's had. We as Lib Dems think that the national insurance charges being put on businesses are wrong and they're having an impact on wages, on jobs, and we think that should be reversed. We think the family farm tax is having a massive impact on the decisions that families who are running farms are able to take about the future of their business, about the future of the land that they've been tending for years and years and years. And we further think that scrabbling around talking for growth in the mad dash for growth, talking about a third runway at Heathrow, isn't how you bring growth to the rest of the country. We know as Lib Dems, we know as a country that the Tories' Brexit deal has not delivered what it said it would do. We also know that there are too many barriers to trading with our European partners, and a closer working relationship with Europe through a customs union would deliver 15 times more growth than any third runway at Heathrow. So the chap over there is absolutely right. Judge people on what they do, but what's been done so far has been underwhelming.
Man with the glasses, the dark blue sweater. Towards the back, yeah.
If Rachel Reeves says she's an economist, why is she committed to not taxing the working person, which is half the amount of levers she has to maintain a good economy, which is like a boxer going into a ring with one hand tied behind their back?
OK. Woman here.
Why won't we consider rejoining the customs union? Because our economy is performing poorly.
Which is, as you say, is Lisa's point, the point you just heard
Why
there.
won't the government rejoin it?
George, is it ever OK to put things on the CV that are not true?
No, it's not OK, but actually this is a pretty trivial issue. I know it's going to be kicked around by the media because the media
and it's not
loves
the first time that it's had to be
gossip.
amended. That's...
No, exactly. Well, you know, it's
and, you
still...
know, it is the Chancellor. This is like the second most important person in the nation.
Fine. No, I accept all that, but actually it's a distraction from the pretty catastrophic situation in which we find ourselves. I think for the opposite of the reasons that Matt puts forward, we have a Chancellor and indeed a Prime Minister who now seem to have no vision at all except this thing called growth, GDP growth. Even the person who first formulated or formalised the concept, Simon Kuznets, said it should not be used as a measure of national welfare. And in some ways there's a direct contradiction between GDP growth and our welfare and prosperity. And we can see this in exactly what Rachel Reeves is doing. She's putting the natural world into the mincing machine to try to turn it into numbers, to try to turn it into GDP growth. With the third runway at Heathrow, with her new trunk roads, with her horrible attack on regulators and regulation. This is our public protection. This regulation is what defends people from the predations of capital, and she's saying let's sweep that away. And to make matters worse, turning on people who care about the living world. Ultimately, the most important thing of all, our life support systems, and abusing us. That is where the real problem lies. If we're talking about deceptions, the big deception is that GDP could be seen as a measure of our well-being.
So, Jacqui, look, I'm going to let you come back in. You know, man over here saying, look, give the woman a chance, but a lot of criticism of Rachel Reeves.
So in 7 months, what Rachel has started to do is to try and turn around the stagnation of the economy of the last 14 years, and in just 7 months. And what she's had to do, to start with, is to actually fix the foundations of a truly awful fiscal situation that we found ourselves in, to invest in the NHS, because nobody can build an economy whilst people are languishing on waiting lists in the way in which they've had to. And I'm sorry, George, I just disagree with you. Unless you can grow the economy, increase the tax revenue base, frankly, you're not going to be able to spend money on some of those things that are pretty important to people, actually. Our schools, our hospitals, our local government services. And in order to be able to do that, what Rachel has been really clear about is we do have to grow the economy. That means building again. That means getting rid of regulation that is preventing that from happening. It means investing in things like I'm responsible for, like skills, so that people can get in their jobs. But that's going to take time to turn around. But she has made an enormously important start, which we're beginning to see the impact of already. Actually, higher than expected growth figures today. The IMF upgrading
0.1%.
Yeah, but higher.
0.1%.
Not good enough, but in 7 months, given everything that we've had to do to fix the foundations and to put in place our plan for change, an important start.
All right. I'm going to end it there for now, because there's a few other questions I want to get in. And I also want to tell you about where we are next week, because next week we're in London, and it will be almost exactly 3 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Quite a lot about Ukraine in the news at the moment, as I'm sure you've noticed. And we will have a special focus on Ukraine. Can there be peace? What should it look like? We will have a special panel for that. And if you'd like to come and be part of the audience, I say it would be in London next week. And in particular, if you are Ukrainian, if you live here or if you've come here as a result of the war, we would love to hear what you have to say in our audience. So please do go to the Question Time website and apply. And hopefully I will see you next week in London. On that note, let's take our next question, which, of course, is related to that. David Legg, where are you? Right.
On what terms should peace in Ukraine be negotiated, or does America hold all the trumps? Or trump cards?
See what you did there, David. Danny.
Well, America does hold a lot of cards in this situation, and we wait to see what the outcome of these conversations that President Trump has been holding with President Zelensky and with Putin. I think the key thing is that Ukraine itself needs to be not just in the room, but the decider about the terms on which the war ends.
But is that likely? I mean, think about it. Donald Trump has had a conversation with Putin. One of a number we're led to believe. They're going to meet, we think, in Saudi Arabia. Only then did he call President Zelensky. I mean, for all the talk, which I'm sure you're going to echo and Lisa's going to echo, and say, obviously, it needs to be on Ukraine's terms, isn't realistically it's going to be on Trump's and Putin's terms?
Well,
that's the way it's looking at the moment.
Well, I think it's going to be on realistic terms, is what we're learning this week, and I think that's probably welcome. We've all been aspiring to the dream that somehow the borders of Ukraine can be returned not just to 2022 but to 2014 for the invasion of Crimea. I think reality has dawned, including on President Zelensky, that that's unrealistic, and we're likely to have some kind of stalemate in which some of the occupied territories will not be returned to Ukraine immediately.
And also Donald Trump has said Ukraine may be Russian someday. They may not be Russian someday.
Well, he has a very casual way of speaking, doesn't he? And that's him. So that's. But listen, I think the significant thing is that we ensure that what the future for Ukraine is secure, and whatever the border, and to what extent it's a temporary one or a permanent one, whatever that is, that the Ukrainian government accepts, is one that we in the West commit to defending. And how we do that is part of the discussion that needs to go on. I think we absolutely have to maintain our commitment to Ukraine. But we also need to recognise that the important thing is that the war stops soon.
I mean, Jacqui, I know you will echo Danny's point about, and as Keir Starmer said, Ukraine needs to be in the room. It needs to be on Ukraine's terms. No peace in Ukraine without Ukraine. Exactly. I know you're going to say that. But are we just onlookers in this, really?
No, I don't believe that we are. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I think it is a fundamentally important part of what we now need Ukraine to be able to achieve. You know, we could... Let me say, first of all, I welcome the fact that Donald Trump is focused on ending the war in Ukraine. It could, of course, be ended today if Putin withdrew his forces and had not, in the first place, engaged in a barbaric and illegal invasion of Ukraine. we've also, what is also impossible, as well as, and, you know, and you sort of sweep it away, but it is pretty important as a response to David's question to say the terms should be the terms that the Ukrainian people would want.
I'm not in any sense sweeping it away, not at all, not for a moment. I'm simply asking, given that Donald Trump is leading this thing with Putin, how much realistically can we expect, rightly or wrongly, that Ukraine will be involved?
Well, what we can do in the UK is what, to be fair, the last government and continued by this government has done, and that is to support the Ukrainian people who are still fighting, of course, and had they not shown enormous bravery, remember, wouldn't have Kyiv, let alone the rest of their country, and they deserve us to stand by them, and that's why we're providing an additional £4.5 billion worth of lethal aid to Ukraine. It's why what we should now be doing is putting them in the strongest possible position so that when a peace is negotiated, and yes, it will be negotiated, it's done on the basis of us providing support to an enormously brave country who have defended their sovereignty. Well, it looks like £4.5 billion worth of lethal aid in order to support them maintaining their current position. And it looks like us, alongside European partners, being absolutely clear, as John Healey was this morning, that there should be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine.
Woman in the red scarf.
Isn't it a very dangerous precedent? It's similar to 1940, you know, when they invaded Poland and saying, oh, yeah, you can have half of Poland. We wouldn't have done that, would we?
Can we get a microphone here? The woman in the stripy shirt.
Yeah, we just need to make sure that Putin's not going, obviously, directly to Trump and thinking he can get his own way and saying, I want half of Ukraine. We need to make sure and invest with them people because they've been through so much.
For sure.
We just need to make sure that the rest of the world are not turning their back on him.
OK. Man in the grey sweater at the back.
I just think that Donald just wants his minerals.
Oh, his rare earth minerals.
That's what he wants. That's why he's doing it.
Matt?
Well, I was looking around social media today and it struck me that a lot of people who like to start wars are suddenly very angry with one guy who wants to stop this war. And there are people who have taken us into one disaster after another, war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, who have spent much of today on social media attacking Trump. What we're seeing, I think, is a reset of geopolitics, a reset. We're seeing the breakdown of what you might call the international liberal world order, which saw 20, 30 years of one foreign policy disaster after another. And Trump, you know, I was at the inauguration in America and people around the president are basically saying, you know, they've had enough of that constant interventionism. They've had enough of Europe, by the way, again, maybe a controversial point, but Europe not paying its way on defence. And they've looked to Germany, they've looked to France, they've looked to Italy, they've looked to the UK, and they said, you know, what are you guys doing? You know, take Germany as an example. Germany under the Greens, absolutely bonkers, becoming more dependent upon Russia because of its ridiculous energy policy, becoming more dependent upon China, and then turning around and criticising Donald Trump when he says we've got to end this war. I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense anymore. There are two things that need to happen. One is Ukraine obviously needs to be involved in the negotiated settlement. That's obvious. But the second key point is this now has to be a line in the sand. After this negotiated settlement, Europe is going to have to pay to defend itself. We cannot just rely on America, because understandably they're saying, look, we've got China. We've got our problems on the border. We've got to revitalise our economy. So I think for everybody who sat there criticising Donald Trump, I do think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and think, actually, are we getting this right here in Europe?
And to the point that a number of that we've heard from a number of commentators and from a couple of European leaders today, that the feeling that Trump has given away quite a bit of leverage already with nothing in return. For example, saying that you know, it's an unrealistic expectation that territory taken by Russia will be given back to Ukraine, that there won't be, that Ukraine cannot be part of NATO, that there will be no US troops on the ground. There's a fairly big, you could say, concessions, if you want to phrase it like that. What do you say to that in terms of, I mean, he's the deal maker, that's how he describes himself. Do you think this is a good way to do a deal?
We don't know what the deal is going to look like, but my personal view, which I accept not everybody will share, I feel actually safer with Trump in the White House than Biden, that's for sure, because I think if you look at what's happened around the world geopolitically, the only thing people in Iran, Russia, China, North Korea respect is strength. That's all they respect. And Trump, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's a strong leader and he's looking after his national interest. We have not looked after our national interest here in Europe consistently for the last 50 years. If we had done that, if we'd invested in our own energy, if we'd become less dependent on Russia, less dependent upon China, I mean, we are inviting China into our energy markets. It's insane. And then we're turning around and criticising the one president who's willing to stand up to China. China is actively investing in UK energy markets, making us more vulnerable in the future. And we're now deciding that Trump is the enemy. We are making bad choices. We are making bad decisions. We need to change the direction of travel.
Lisa.
So the answer to David's question about on what terms should peace in Ukraine be negotiated is on Ukraine's terms. You cannot just say to Putin that he can come in and have some of Ukraine just because he asked for it and just because he wanted it. This is an enormous threat to Europe. It's war on the European continent, and that matters to all of us.
The thing is, that's easy to say, Lisa, but you've got Russia that does not want Ukraine to exist.
No, indeed.
Exactly. And
that's why we have to stand
at the
up to
moment,
them.
so far, there's been two impossible things to put together.
The way Trump and Putin behave is like playground bullies. And what you don't say on a Tuesday when the playground bully has stolen your dinner money on a Monday is please don't steal it on a Tuesday. You don't just give a bully what they want. The micro point that I agreed with from Matt was that we need to spend properly on defence in this country. So I agree that the Tory cuts in troop numbers that happened under the last government need to be reversed. I think the big thing that our government needs to do in the UK is support our Ukrainian allies, not least by releasing those frozen Russian assets that are in UK banks. The last number I saw was about £22 billion, so that Ukraine can defend itself, because the way you respond to bullies is through strength.
OK, man at the back. Yes, with the dark sweater, yes.
It all seems fairly simple to Trump that Ukraine just have to suck it up and accept the current boundaries. Those living in Gaza just have to suck it up and go along with his plan. What's going to happen? Is he going to be so laissez-faire when it comes to China and their expansionism?
Well, into Taiwan, for example,
yeah.
Thinking. Man here, can't quite see what you're wearing, dark sweater of some kind.
Donald Trump's clearly shown in the last 2 weeks that he's got no regard for the Palestinian people. So how do we know he's going to have any regard for the Ukrainians? What's the difference?
George.
So either Donald Trump is siding with the aggressor against the aggressed because that's the kind of guy he likes, he's attracted to his fellow tyrants, or he is the world's worst negotiator because he has given away those trump cards right at the beginning of the process. I think it's both. And we are seeing a transition here, but it's not for the reasons Matt's talking about. We're seeing a transition away from a broadly democratic world towards a broadly despotic one.
I mean, he obviously was democratically elected, Donald Trump. Very comfortably.
Having tried to overthrow the results of a previous democratic
But
election.
this time he was comfortably elected.
He was, no question, but he will do everything he can to turn this into an authoritarian state. He's very attracted to people like Putin. He sees Putin as a kind of model for the government that he would like to pursue, and indeed, in some respects, he is already pursuing that. Give Putin what he wants, and already Trump has basically said, you can have what you want. Ukraine's not going to be a member of NATO. There's not going to be any territorial concessions back to Ukraine. And that says to Putin, right, Moldova next. Who knows? Romania, maybe? Poland. Let's have a look at those Baltic states.
What about Matt's points, which is, you know, Ukraine was in a state of slow losing, you could argue. Because it wasn't getting enough money and enough weapons to really, really defeat Russia. And meanwhile, thousands and thousands of people are dying. I mean, Matt's point is, at least he's doing something, and he's in your view, showing strength.
Well, there are Chamberlains in every generation.
Oh, here we go.
And this is the kingdom. This is direct
So, George,
appeasement
how
of
do
an
you
aggressor,
end the
of
war in
someone
Ukraine?
Just a moment. This is direct appeasement of someone who has moved into a sovereign country, seized its territory, sought to seize the entire country, and it's as if, you know, he'd come to the UK, he'd occupied Kent, Surrey, Sussex, and then somebody else like Donald Trump comes along and says, yeah, fine, guys, just live with that, no trouble at all. These people who go on and on about sovereignty, say they're the defenders of sovereignty. When it actually comes to the crunch, they will sell anyone down the river.
So, George, sorry, you haven't answered my question. Berating everybody as Chamberlains, how do you solve the war in Ukraine? What's your solution?
We have to help Ukraine
Just
to
keep
defend
going.
itself.
Just
Well,
keep
yes.
going.
Yes, that's what
13
Ukraine
billion
wants
from
to
all-
do.
for 13 billion
This
from
is
the
what
UK
Ukraine
taxpayers.
wants to do. Ukraine does not want to surrender on Trump's terms. It is up to Ukraine.
So there you go.
And anyone who cares for a democratic world order, anyone who cares about stopping aggression and expansionism, should side with Ukraine trying to defend its sovereign territory.
So the answer, I mean, the choice essentially is you keep going, million men dead on the battlefield, you paid 13 billion, taxpayer money, we keep going, we keep going, we keep going, in the stalemate, there's no resolution, there's no end outcome, there's no negotiated settlement. You think that's a viable solution? It's not a viable solution. What we have to do is get everybody around a table, including the Ukrainians, and have a settlement, have a negotiated settlement. That's not about appeasement. It's about being realistic about the conflict that is unfolding in the heart of Europe. And you know, it's very
trying to
very
make a settlement
convenient.
on Putin's terms,
You know,
not on Ukraine's
all we
terms,
hear,
on Putin's
all we
terms.
hear as well, George, from
And
liberal
that
internationalists...
Hang on, don't both talk at the same time.
All we hear from liberal internationalists is, well, the world's becoming more authoritarian. Everybody's becoming a dictator. I mean, I didn't hear you complaining about Joe Biden and the Democrats using the judiciary and the legal system to try and shut down Trump. I didn't hear about you saying, well, the Democrats are actually lying to their country about Joe Biden's health.
OK, we're getting quite far off Ukraine, can I just say?
Gets a free pass.
OK,
But
listen, we're straying well off the subject here.
We're back in the
OK.
The idea that it ends
endless
if you
alarmism.
appease Putin is the greatest self-deception I've heard in quite a long time.
OK, I'm going to stop it here.
Hang
on, Jacqui.
Destroys Putin's economy.
I am going to stop it here simply because next week, as I've already said, we are doing a programme focusing on Ukraine. So we will be picking up with these arguments. So I know it's incredibly important, not least to the people of Ukraine. But I'm going to stop it here for now, and we will revisit this subject next week. Let's take another question from Michael. Michael Fitzgerald. There you go.
Will denying citizenship to anybody that enters the UK illegally reduce the number of people trying to get in?
So, Michael, what you're referring to is, and obviously, Jacqui, you can tell us more about this, but the government has toughened the rules to make it pretty much impossible for people arriving illegally via a small boat or some kind of vehicle, not by plane, but a small boat or vehicle. So we're talking about the Channel, basically. Made it almost impossible for them to become a British citizen, and that includes people who are already here. Lisa.
So the system that we have at the moment in this country is not working for anyone. It is not working for communities like mine, because 2 of our hotels are currently being used to house loads of folk who are waiting for their asylum application to be processed. It's not working for anybody who's living in an asylum hotel because they can't cook for themselves, they've got no money to buy basic essentials, and they're often being called by their room number rather than their name as they wait months and years. So they can't get on with their life. And it is certainly not working for the British taxpayer.
And the question is, will this particular move by the government, which was announced this week, reduce the number of people trying to come here across the Channel?
No, this move will not reduce the number of people trying to cross the Channel. What will, though, I think there are 2 things that really will. One is having proper legal routes so that people who do have a right to come here can come here and don't need to risk their lives by getting in an overcrowded dinghy and coming across the Channel. The other thing that will really help is if people's applications are processed really quickly and those with no right to be here are returned swiftly. What we want is people who do have a right to be here want to contribute to this country. They want to be able to work, they want to be able to pay tax, they want to integrate. And a path to citizenship helps that. The current rhetoric that's coming out of the government, I don't think is going to help that. What we want is a fair and effective immigration and asylum system, and that is not what we've got at the moment.
Jacqui, is this going to make any difference?
Just to be clear, it's not rhetoric that's coming out of the government at the moment, it's action that's coming out of the government. That's why we've seen, and I think you're exactly right, Lisa, that one of the first things that needed to happen was that the Home Office, instead of being led by people that were interested in making headlines, was led by people who were interested in making a difference.
Okay. So how will this reduce the numbers of people wanting to come in? Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, people who come illegally and successfully claim asylum can still apply and achieve, in the right circumstances, indefinite leave to remain, which means they get access to, universal credit, the NHS, education, all the rest of it. What they won't get now is a passport and the ability to stand for public office. And you think that's the thing that's going to make the difference?
I don't think that's the only thing that's going to make the difference.
But you obviously think it... But how do you think this is going to make a difference?
Which was why I was talking about the things... I will come to it in a moment. But
well, that's what the question's about, so let's talk about that specifically now.
No, you said to me what would make a difference, and I was telling you what
the question is, will denying citizenship to anyone that enters the UK legally reduce the number of people trying to get in?
There is already guidance about the constraints, the situation in terms of granting citizenship. What happened with the guidance this week is that, yes, the government did toughen it up. They did say that there would no longer be a 10-year default position where you would be eligible to get your citizenship, and that if you had come illegally, particularly exploited onto a small boat and with your life put at risk, an important signal would be that that would be a criteria which would make it less likely that you would get citizenship. But
OK, so if you can get indefinite leave to remain, so you can stay here and work here and gain benefits, but you can't get citizenship, how big a deterrent
is that? What this is it's sending a clear message to people who are being exploited and killed by people trying to get them into small boats across the Channel, that won't achieve the objective that they want to achieve. But as I was saying, more importantly, we are seeing action. We are returning more people who don't have a right to stay in the country so that those that do can get on with their lives. We've got rid of the Rwanda gimmick and have redeployed 1,000 people into actually making the system work properly. And we proposed legislation on Monday to strengthen our borders, to give those fighting the criminal gangs that are bringing people across the Channel in small boats the sort of terrorism powers that will enable them to do that more effectively. And Danny's party voted against it.
Matt?
Sorry, I mean, the Labour Party are basically lying to you when it comes to illegal
What
migration.
was a lie?
And
what was
I'm going to tell you. First of all, let's just get some facts on the table, OK? Get some facts on the table. More people have arrived in this country on small boats than the Labour Party have removed. And most of the people they've removed went voluntarily, OK? That's a fact. What Labour are doing is they are approving the vast majority of claims for asylum from people who arrived here often illegally, and then they're telling you they're moving people out of the country, but actually they're not. And Fiona made a critical point. If you've been here for 5 years, you get indefinite leave to remain, which means basically you get access to NHS, student loans, benefits, you can bring relatives in, and you're here forever. Now,
do you think we shouldn't grant asylum?
Sorry, the Centre for Policy... I'm going to answer the question I was asked. The Centre for Policy Studies this week estimated that you, taxpayers, are going to have to pay £234 billion over the next few decades because of that indefinite leave to remain, because nobody's controlling the borders. Now, we're not controlling the borders. Why? Well, Labour got rid of the only deterrent we had. It was too soon to know whether it was working or not. They then...
Well, it wasn't working. It was costing £700 million.
They then decriminalised illegal migration. They removed AIDS checks on people coming into the country. They didn't reduce any welfare for people coming in to Britain. And then on top of all of that, we now have numbers up 15% on a year ago. They're going to keep coming because we have no deterrent. All we have are incentives for people to come in. The only way you fix this crisis, leave the ECHR, keep British people safe, reform the Human Rights Act, also need to do that, and have an active deterrent. Those are the only three things that are going to keep you safe in this country.
That's your opinion. Jacqui, I know you don't agree with that.
Because Labour's making a mess of it.
So what you need to do is to tackle the criminals that are exploiting...
Because that worked in the war on drugs. Smashing the gangs worked in the war on drugs, didn't it, for the last 30 years? No, it didn't. Everybody who's worked on border security knows Labour's plan is not going to work.
OK, let Jacqui answer.
Labour's plan is already working.
No, numbers are up 15%.
Professor...
Numbers are up 15%.
Professor, if I could just say...
but it isn't working, is it?
OK, let her answer, Matt, seriously.
Right, so Labour's plan is working in terms of the returns. And the question I was asking you, Matt, is do you really want to live in a country where if somebody has got a legitimate right to asylum, a refugee, you would turn that down? Because that's essentially what you were arguing. I don't want to live in a country where if somebody has escaped torture, has escaped tyranny and has come here and has had their case judged, that they are not allowed to live in this country.
How many refugees have we taken since 2021?
No. You answered my question.
I'm answering by saying we've taken around 400,000
You haven't answered the question.
Matt,
answer the question.
From Ukraine. I think that's a great thing. I think we should accept some genuine refugees. But what has happened now is governments on both the left and the right have completely lost control of our borders.
OK, you've made that
acceptable.
point. Let's hear a bit more from Orange. This man there in the green T-shirt.
That's the one. I find it quite disgusting how we're talking about human beings who are genuinely... And it's not illegal to claim asylum in a foreign country, OK? Like saying they're illegal immigrants is not. They're asylum seekers and refugees. Illegal immigrants tend to be people who come here legally and overstay a visa, or they overstay an application. That's the majority of illegal immigrants that are within this country. They're not people that are fleeing war. And we know that countries that are more closer to the Middle East tend to take on a lot more refugees than we ever do. Right? And it's the element of calling these people invaders or dehumanising them so that we can point a finger at them and say, you're the reason that we've got a housing shortage. But we have only built 250,000 council houses since Thatcher came into power. But before that, we built 5 million. That's a fact. So I don't understand why you always people like to claim that, immigrants are the problem when it's recent successive governments that have always been the problem.
Hang on,
Perhaps Trump would have an answer to this. He would say to the Royal Navy, take all the immigrants coming across in the boats and plant them back on the shores of France.
And is that what you would like to see happen?
I would like to see something like that happen, yes.
OK. Danny.
So,
would you like to see something like that?
I mean, it is obviously true that the way to stop the boats is to stop the boats.
But would you like to see it done like that?
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's legally possible. I think we have relations with France that would make that difficult. But what we do need to do, and Matt is absolutely right, is have an absolute deterrent. People who arrive here illegally, and they are arriving illegally, means that they should be. It is illegal to break into this country. They should be deported. And excuse me.
Look, you're lying.
No, it is illegal to break into this country. And I want to come on to your point, sir, because I think you're absolutely right about human beings. We have a genuine obligation to do what we can to the needy of the world, to the displaced, to the dispossessed, to the people fleeing torture. And we do that generously as this country, as we always have. But I'm afraid Matt is right. We have in this country taken hundreds of thousands of people from war-torn nations around the world.
Every other country in Europe.
Let him answer.
And I'm afraid to say, you talk about human beings, there are 100 million human beings in this world who would qualify for refugee status. Are you suggesting that any one of those people... Wait a second. Any one of those people who can make it to these shores should be allowed to come here and live here? Because that is what a policy of saying we should give asylum to anybody who makes it here.
100 million people aren't going to come here.
So
I'm going to have to let other people speak as well, sorry.
We do have to have some kind of limit. And we can argue about how generous that limit is. I think we have been generous as a nation. I don't think just saying have more legal routes is going to satisfy it, because there is always going to be more and more people who are available to come.
Nice.
So let's be generous, but let's be sensible as well. Let's say you can only come here if you apply properly and if we've identified you as deserving of asylum, and you can come and stay. You can't have anybody who can afford thousands of pounds to cross Europe and to pay a people trafficker the money to get over to this country, being the people who
properly
get
means
ahead
legal
of the queue.
routes.
Hang on, let me get around the panel as well. Yes, man there in the sky.
To look after ourselves and people from the rest of the world, we need to have wealth. And to have wealth, we need to have growth. And to have growth, everything else will follow. We can help ourselves and we can help other people. But we are in this stagflation and we need to move on if we are to help ourselves and help everybody else.
George.
Right. Well, here's the fix that people who might want to seek asylum in this country face. That you can't apply for asylum until you arrive on these shores. But if
Apart
you're in
from
your...
a few selected particular
but that's almost been completely closed down now anyway. But you cannot also, in your home country that you're trying to escape, seek a visa on the basis that you're going to apply for asylum. You can't do it. It's a perfect catch-22. You're completely stuck. There isn't actually a formal route that you can take which would satisfy the government. This is why people are forced to come here by other means, for instance, in small boats. And it happens that of those who came here in small boats last year, up to June 2024, despite an ever more draconian system, 66%, two-thirds, were granted leave to have asylum here because their claim was found to be a good claim. They were found to be people who were in genuine fear of persecution, of murder, of torture, people who were fleeing as people have fled through all generations. The Refugee Convention 1951 was set up by Britain and other countries in response to the utter failures of what happened in Europe in the 1930s and 1940s, where we did not offer asylum to many people who were subsequently murdered, Jews first among them, but other people as well. And we pledged that that was never going to happen again. But now we offer no formal route by which people can legally meet the criteria, meet the standards that you set to apply for asylum in this country, and in doing so, we are effectively saying we're tearing up the convention, we're stepping away from this, we are abandoning our humanity, our obligations to fellow human beings.
Jacqui, what's your response to that?
Well, my response is, but actually I think there has been a big confusion from Danny and Matt about the distinction between those who are seeking...
I'm asking, what's your response to George's point,
Well,
that refugees find themselves, or those who'd like to be refugees, accepted as such, are in this catch-22, that they either come illegally, as it's been made illegal by the previous government, or they're kind of stuck because they can't apply, apart from a few selected schemes, they cannot apply for asylum from abroad.
Well, I do think that it's really important that we don't encourage those criminals and hideous gangs who are putting people into boats and causing them to lose their lives.
What about that catch-22? Is that something that Labour would like to resolve?
Well, I think I've been quite clear that when people come here, I think the idea that you would not properly consider their refugee status, as appears to have been suggested, by the way, by both Matt and Danny, is abhorrent. But there's this confusion in what's being...
In terms of increasing the safe and legal routes, which is what Lisa's talking about and what George is talking about,
well,
is that something that Labour is interested in doing?
We need to make sure that the criminals that are exploiting people
and
are
in terms of
being...
increasing safe and legal routes, is that something that Labour government is interested in or not?
Well, of course, when there has been a real requirement for people to be able to come here, we have made those routes available. But I just want to make this point about the distinction.
So if I'm in Eritrea or Sudan, if I'm escaping persecution in Eritrea, escaping persecution in Sudan, what do? I can't go to the embassy and say, can I have a visa so I can seek asylum in the UK?
As the gentleman over there said,
what do I do?
Most people go to their neighbouring countries, of course, and who take far more refugees than we do, and we need to make sure that they have the support to do that. But to come back to this point about the difference between refugees and legal migrants, it is a small minority of those who come to this country and stay who come through that refugee route. The larger proportion, who Matt is claiming are putting pressure on our services, have come because of the complete lack of control of the last government, which made a whole load of legal migration, who made a whole load of promises about cutting net migration and wholly failed to do that. And in doing that, have caused some of the angst and the concern that is being expressed by people today.
Well, you're not making it any better. You haven't answered the question. You're not making the situation any better because you are not affording safe and legal routes for people to come here through the right channels. And if you don't do that, you force people into these horrible choices which you then complain about. You're quite right about what Matt and Danny are saying, and Tory policy was outrageous. But the way it's going, because you're not resolving this catch-22 situation, Labour policy is scarcely better.
What?
All right, I'm going to leave it there. I want to take one more question. We've got about 9 minutes or so. I want to try and fit it in. Tracy Smith, there you are.
With Donald Trump and Elon Musk now getting things sorted in America, do you think the Labour government would benefit from more business people in the government position, in a government position?
All right, Donald Trump again. My goodness. His name gets mentioned every day. Well, look, let's ask Tracy, what do you think? You're basically saying, you know, as far as you're concerned, they're getting things done. Could we benefit from a bit of that here?
I don't agree on lots of things that he's doing, but he's just doing things, whereas over here, just nothing gets done. It takes forever. It just, for anything.
So you'd like to see a few more executive orders, would you?
I'd like people to make a decision. These politicians are all at university. They don't seem to know what they're doing, and people that just everyday people seem to be able to make better decisions or seem to know what the country needs because they're living on a different planet. They're just not.
Right, Lisa, you're living on a different planet. That's one would argue. All three of you are, presumably.
I'm going to use this opportunity to say that you promoted me when you introduced me earlier.
Oh, did I?
You said I'd been Deputy Leader of Stockport Council, and I wasn't. I was Deputy Leader of the Lib Dem group when we were in opposition.
Ah, OK. You could have just taken it.
But I think...
as long as it wasn't on your CV, Lisa.
Right, on my CV. I think the point that Tracy's making is a really good one about making sure we've got people who've got different experiences in politics. I think if everybody has been to the same university studying the same course and they all look and sound a bit the same, you're going to get rubbish results. And there's loads of scientific evidence that shows if you have a balanced team with different experiences, you're going to get much more out of it, you're going to get much more positive results. And so as a Lib Dem group, we've got 8 people who served in the armed forces. And so when we as a group in the parliamentary party at the moment, when we're talking about sending troops to war, we've got people who've been to war, who've been fired on by the Taliban, who can tell us what it means. We've
but
got
what
people
Tracy
who've
wants
run
is more business
businesses,
people. That's what
which
you're
I'm
saying.
getting to, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think people who run businesses understand about balance sheets, understand about HR, which, goodness me, Parliament could do with people who understand about HR and how to run teams and how to encourage and mentor staff. We need people with a wide variety of experiences, including some from local government or the city where I worked or charities that I ran, because I think only when we get people from all across our country representing loads of different skills and talents and experiences, then we get the best for the whole country. So I agree.
Danny? More business people in prominent government positions.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And my background around charities is not quite the same, but running businesses, having the experience of knowing what it is to face a bottom line and paying wages and dealing with all the challenges of the real world is crucial to politics. Just on Trump and these businessmen that he's got involved. I think it's invigorating because what they're really doing is dismantling a bloated apparatus of government that doesn't get things done. And I think we do need a bit of that here. We might not need to do it in quite the same way. We don't have to be American about it. We need to be a bit British. But the principle's the same one. We have here in this country a totally sort of frozen economy that can't seem to move. It's impossible to do anything.
The Conservatives were in power for 14 years, and
I completely...
when you're saying it's bloated and all the rest of it...
Yeah. So
you must have known I was going to say that.
You were the Prime Minister's political secretary.
Yeah. Well, I was Boris Johnson's political secretary, and we came in 2019 with a tremendous plan to reform the state, and then COVID
What
hit.
happened to it?
And then, I'm sorry to say, COVID hit. And all sorts of problems that we are totally responsible for. I'm not going to defend the situation we've got. I'm really not. Actually, the Tory party recognises many of the problems that we've got do lie at our door. But it's a historic one. It's to do with the fact that the British state has been run by people who basically just try and take more and more power to the centre. They don't want business people running their businesses properly, and they don't trust people on the front line and on the ground. And we do absolutely need some of that Trumpian energy to reform the system and basically trust people to run their own lives in a meaningful way and restore the government to the people. That's what people voted for in Brexit. That's why they voted for Boris. I'm afraid we didn't deliver sufficiently. We've absolutely got to. Labour is certainly not going to do it.
Now, George, I'm getting don't ask me why, I'm kind of getting the impression you're a big fan of Donald Trump. But, he's not letting the grass grow under his feet. That's certainly one way of putting it.
That is true. I would say to the questioner, beware of what you wish for. No.
He's just doing something.
Well, it is true. You know, I mean, we do see a sense of drift in this country. The solution is not what Donald Trump is doing, but we do need a government which not only knows what it's doing, but knows what it wants. And I don't think we see that at the moment. However, what's really going on is he's sending in not just ordinary business people, oligarchs, billionaires, including the richest man on earth, to wage a kind of class war against the working people in the middle in the US. He's
waging war on the elite. He's waging war on the elite. He's waging war on the establishment. USAID, which is protecting some of the poorest people on earth. Those people are now being deprived of food, being deprived of medicines. These are the elite. The real-world effects of this are absolutely devastating to people within the United States and beyond. And indeed, as they start tearing down some of the essential safeguards, like financial regulation, it could cause absolute crisis and chaos.
OK, we've only got about 3 minutes left. You'll have to be pretty brief. This man there with the glasses.
If our politicians cared as much as Trump does about America, then this country would be in a much better place. Politicians, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. They're only in it for themselves. That's all it seems to be. They tell lie after lie after lie.
Are you counting all three on our panel in that?
I am, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they're all the same. They're all from the same school. They all do the same thing. They're all in it themselves, and they never, ever do anything for the normal person. They're only interested in themselves.
Right. You're going to have to... I'll come to you. As a last politician I haven't yet come to, Jacqui, briefly.
Well, first of all, I think Lisa was absolutely right. And if Tracy's point is we need a whole variety of people who've had all sorts of experiences to make better decisions, I completely agree with you, which is why just this week, for example, in one of the areas that I'm responsible for, Skills England, we've put in charge of that somebody who used to run Cisco, who knows a lot about business, employers, technology, communications, all the sorts of things that we need to get better at developing people's skills in. But there are other people that bring all sorts of experiences. You know, I was a teacher before I was a politician. That's helped to inform me. I think there are people that work in local government. By the way, I also agree with the point that too much of our power is held centrally. That's why we need to give more of it, as we are doing, to people who are elected more locally, whether or not they're mayors or local councils, because when decisions get closer to people and when a whole range of people are involved in it, that's when you make better decisions. I completely agree about that.
Matt?
I mean, I think what's so refreshing about Trump, whatever your view about the man, is he's giving his voters what he said he was going to give them, and he's taking decisive action. My personal view is we need some kind of similar radical revolution in this country that understands that 70 to 80% of Brits, they do want their borders controlled. They don't want open borders. They don't want their kids being taught that little boys can become little girls and little girls can become little boys. And they don't want the state... I'm sorry, well, it's true, it's science.
Big intake of breath from our audience.
And they don't want the state... They don't want the state imposing a political project on them from above. They want the state to invest in their own people. You know, I'll give you an example. Trump's getting a lot of heat from people like George for USAID. Have you seen what they were spending it on? Some of the projects are absurd, like the foreign aid that we spend $15 billion in this country on foreign aid. We support programmes for obese children in China, for eco-farms in Nepal, and we've got British people in hospitals in this country being treated in corridors and car parks. It's absolutely outrageous. Of course we need a radical revolution in this country.
I'm going to end it there because we are out of time, I'm afraid. Apologies to those of you who've still got your hands up, but our time is up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to all of you for coming, putting in your points and questions. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. And remember, next week we're in London with a programme with a special focus on Ukraine. If you want to be in the audience, particularly if you're from Ukraine, do apply to the Question Time website. But from Northwich in Cheshire, bye-bye.